nuclear power. And one of the topics that, one of the topics I'm very interested in is actually nuclear power because that's my major. I'm a nuclear engineering major. And so I've always been very interested in this topic, but I've found that over the time and over years that not everyone is quite as supportive of nuclear reactors and nuclear power as I am. There's a lot of actually different political opinions on this topic, and so I was interested, I did some research to find out what exactly the public opinion of nuclear power is. I found that the results varied quite a bit. As you can see from these three different polls, one found that 44% of the public supports it and 54% opposed it. Another poll found that only 39% support and 26% opposed, and the other remaining percentage are just simply unsure. And then another one found that the majority of people, a great majority, support it. And so I was a little confused of why these polls, which were administered by professional organizations that know how to handle statistics, were so off. And what I found to be, I think, the problem was that the people that were polled had differing levels of public knowledge. For example, in this poll, these people lived near nuclear reactors. And so they knew a lot about them because they lived near them. And these other polls were just, based on the questions they asked, showed that they weren't that a lot of the differences in the public opinion depend on the actual opinion of the knowledge base of the people. So I wanted to ask, who is it that tells the public about things that we don't necessarily learn about in school, like nuclear power? And I came to the assumption that it could be the news media, the standard news base of like CNN, NPR, Fox News, all these different, Wall Street Journal, all these different news articles. And so I wanted to ask, is the news media biased when reporting about nuclear power, as determined by sentiment analysis? Earlier in the year, I was in a group that did a project on textual analysis, and I wanted to see if that overall, if I could use those same skills in that same sort of program to determine whether or not the news media in general is biased towards the topic of nuclear power. And part of the thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to create my own program. I didn't really want to use someone else's, so with my newfound MATLAB skills from CS1371, I created this program that basically what it did, after doing some research, I learned that the way that people determined sentiment or bias is they compared the words in an article to what they called a positive word lexicon and a negative word lexicon. What that means is the positive word lexicon had a group of, in the case for mine, had a group of 4,000 words that had strong positive sentiments such as good, great, fascinating. And the negative word lexicon had a group of 2,000 words that were very negatively polarized. For example, bad, terrible, or disastrous. And so as I compared these, I built a program that would read at every single word in the article. If a positive word matched with a positive word lexicon, it would add +1 to an overall score. And if it was a negative, such as like disaster or deadly, it would subtract 1, or in this case 2, because it's in the same sentence. So I did this analysis, but I figured out that if an article was talking about that, I couldn't actually determine whether it was talking about the topic at hand of nuclear power or just anything in general. So I wanted to do a more topic-specific analysis. And so I created yet another lexicon. And this one first compared each sentence. It separated all the articles into their sentences, and then it compared them to see if there were common key words, such as nuclear or reactor or Chernobyl, or about 50 different words that would suggest that a sentence was actually talking about something about nuclear power. And so I ran these tests. And I did this on 27 articles from NPR and 23 articles from CNN. I searched the most relevant articles on nuclear power. And I found that according to the program that I had written, CNN was generally slightly negatively biased with an average score of -5.5, which means they usually use between the average, or the positive and the negative words, they use usually about 5.5 more negative words than positive words. And NPR was pretty neutral. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see that overall. However, I did this topic-specific bias analysis where it only did the analysis if a sentence specifically referred to the topic of nuclear power. And when I did that, I found that both of them were honestly quite neutral, which was interesting. But when I did a little bit of further analysis of this, when I looked at the actual data points and the results of each article, I found that what had happened is that not very many articles actually referred to nuclear power in that way. They referred to the idea of it using antecedents such as like it or they, and using different pronouns, but they didn't actually use key words. So there are very few sentences that contained both. So there are very few data points to make this conclusion. The program that I did also did a word frequency. And I found this to be kind of interesting, the results that came up with this. So we can determine that the search engines do actually work. When I searched nuclear power, the most commonly used words was nuclear and power and plant, but also other words such as, interesting enough, 3 Mile Island, which was a nuclear disaster, came up as very common. Japan, where there was a large nuclear meltdown in 2011, also came up. And a lot of actually kind of negative disasters came up, it seemed like, but also other words like new and reactor and industry came up. They suggest that there's been some development. So it looked like it was kind of a positive and negative mix. I did the same thing on CNN and found practically the same results, where it refers to nuclear disasters such as Fukushima, Japan, and the word disaster, but it also refers to like updated to new and energy, such as these positive words. So overall, the general analysis showed that CNN was negatively biased towards nuclear power and that NPR was more neutral. And the topic-specific analysis that looked specifically if they used the keywords based on keywords relating to nuclear power, that it was to be neutral. However, I found that with only 50 articles in total, the 23 for CNN, 27 for NPR, it's still pretty difficult to make a general assumption about an entire company that writes hundreds of articles each day practically. And I also found that because the topic-specific analysis didn't really have that many data points and didn't identify ideas, just gave a score only when there was, it referred specifically to a word, but it didn't really have this sophistication to identify when an article was actually talking about nuclear power. And so these are things that would need to be improved in a future project in order to make it so that we could actually determine whether and how the news media influences us on the topic of not only nuclear power, but as my project could be updated to practically any topic, of really any topic, such as political topics or other related topics. And so overall, on the mock of my project, we cannot make any general conclusion, but on a future project that's more sophisticated and has many more articles, I believe it could work very well. That is the end of my presentation.